So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. And if you have any questions for Bryan, just as with the last presentation, go ahead and ask them as we go. And Bryan, it's all yours.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. My name is Bryan Badger. I'm the CEO and CTO right now of Integral Networks. Thanks for joining us. I was kind of wanting to go hit up the VDI session myself. So just a quick overview. We're going to kind of talk a little bit more about our implementation of Nexenta, how we made the change from some larger enterprise type storage infrastructures over to Nexenta without, as the title suggests, compromising on anything that we really look for in those enterprise class solutions. So a little bit about us, myself specifically again, Bryan with Integral Networks. I oversee all the daily business and technology operations of Integral Networks. This slide's a little bit out of date. We have more data centers than that now, but I handle all the daily operations of our data centers, the support perspective from help desk, and then the planning and expansion of our data centers as well too. And then this is a hosted service provider's perspective of Nexenta. We kind of did this webinar a couple months ago with Nexenta and Pogo Storage, so they thought this would be a good real-world example to talk with everybody about. A little bit about our company. We were founded in 2004. We're out of Rockland, California. That's actually Sacramento. We're an established provider of cloud-based technology solutions. We've been doing cloud-based technology solutions for over 7 years now. Our specific focus is desktop as a service, and a secondary focus is infrastructure as a service. We also provide the traditional managed services, infrastructure management, and integration type services as well. A little bit about the infrastructure. We have 140 plus physical servers. Approximately 90 are VMware, 50 are Zen server, and we only have one physical server that actually has an OS installed, so otherwise we are 100% virtualized. We are serving roughly 500 virtual servers, 1,100 hosted desktops, 2,500 hosted Exchange mailboxes, and a small number of websites there. The hardware that we're running is all Dell PowerEdge C6105s with some mixes of Dell R710s. Most of the infrastructure, as you can see above, is powered by VMware, and then we have a mix of Zen server in there as well too. And we've partnered with SunGuard availability services for data center colo space. On a day-to-day basis, we're serving right around 1,100 hosted desktops, and again 2,500 hosted Exchange mailboxes. And between 400 to 500 are the virtual servers for both in-house infrastructure and clients under our infrastructure as a service. We have to be always on, always accessible. So backup, disaster recovery, storage, which all that stuff runs off of, was very, very critical for us. And then data protection. We have 15-minute intervals for Exchange, all data points, all VMs, everything. So we can roll back everything within a 15-minute window, whether it's a full VM or restoring an individual file or pulling an email out of a client's mailbox. We started with Dell EqualLogic PS5000s and 6000 series for the back-end SANs. That very quickly proved to be cost prohibitive from the fact that you can only put so many spindles behind each head node. So we found that our real estate and our racks was filling up pretty quickly. We then started evaluating some of the NetApp products. Very good. We got some pretty good performance out of it initially, but once we loaded the stuff up, it started to really fail on us. And everything that NetApp was suggesting that we do to solve some of those performance issues was just skyrocketing the prices on everything. So it really didn't make sense for us to continue with some of the mainstream enterprise SAN providers that most of you guys know of. Plus, being as we're in the cloud services industry, we have to find all ways that we can to reduce our costs. And when NetApp wants $5,000 for a 16 gig RAM upgrade, you kind of have to scratch your head on some of that stuff. So our storage costs were getting completely out of hand. We were upwards of 20 to 30 terabytes at the time. And performance was starting to become an issue with us as well too. With the NetApp and the EqualLogics at the time, everything was gigabit. So we were using iSCSI with dual, or in some cases, quad gigabit connections. The cost to upgrade to 10 gig E were kind of out of hand, again, with the NetApp, and at the time, EqualLogic actually did not support that. So some of the things that drove us to really start looking around, as I talked about, is that we needed something that could scale very quickly, very easily. It had to be high availability. We could not experience any type of downtime, especially with our hosted services. We had to have support for multiple hypervisors. Interesting note here, though, we are actually in the process of removing VMware from our mix and going more open source, Zen, KVM, that type of stuff. And so we needed something that was working with multiple hypervisors, not just working, but really optimized and could work well with all of them. We needed to be able to virtualize existing storage platforms. So we already made a large investment in the NetApps, the EqualLogics, and some other products as well too, and we can't just dump that stuff as much as we would like to. So we needed a product that would allow us to virtualize existing storage and manage it from there instead. Of course, unlimited snapshots, offsite replication, deduplication. While it wasn't key for us, it kind of interested us at the time. And we'll go into more on that a little bit later, but we ended up using that more for archival purposes than anything else. And of course, multi-protocol supports. We have people like, well, primarily NetApp pushing us to use NFS over iSCSI. EqualLogic, of course, we were locked into iSCSI only. So the fact that we could do NFS, CIFs, AD integrations, that type of stuff was pretty beneficial for us. And again, kind of the general theme here is cost effective, and we had to be able to scale as well. So this is kind of how, just kind of reiterating what I already put in text, kind of a visual representation. We're using 10 gig E networking across the board. We are using actually Community Edition Nexenta for some of our replication and snapshot. So we're using the commercial edition of Nexenta for the primary production SAN and an active-active HA pair. So both nodes are serving up their own ZVols at this point. And then we're offloading to the Community Edition for snapshots and replication. So again, another good cost-effective alternative that Nexenta allowed us to do, whereas going out and buying another EqualLogic or another NetApp. Early on, we actually we didn't have a whole lot of time for testing on this new platform. We were already pretty heavily ingrained with EqualLogic and NetApp, and we didn't have a whole lot of engineering time. We were at a spot where we had to scale almost 15 terabytes, literally in the period of 1 week. So we partnered with Pogo Linux or Pogo Storage to provide kind of a turnkey certified Nexenta solution for us that literally went straight into production. We worked with both Nexenta and Pogo to kind of come up with what our workloads were, what we were seeing on the existing SAN infrastructure, and this is the configuration that came back. Excuse me, my 2-year-old came home with a runny nose on Monday, and I'm starting to feel it now. So, one of the things that we wanted to try and take advantage of from the beginning was deduplication. So that's why initially the RAM count was a little bit high. Although, as we found out later, that's more average. It's more standard of what you want your Nexenta head nodes to be. And also, we discovered don't use deduplication in a production environment. It's not quite ready for it yet, and you can't throw enough RAM into your head nodes to really support it at this time. Again, some of the cost-effective features were the fact that we could use SSD drives for the ZILs and the L2 ARCs, and use lower-cost spindles on the backside. That really helped keep the cost down and allowed us to scale very, very quickly in terms of the amount of raw storage that we had available to us. And not sacrifice anything with performance. An update on this configuration, one of the things that we are in the process of doing right now is adding the Zeus RAM drives to the ZIL, and we are changing the L2 ARC drives from the 80 gig SSDs to 320 gig SAS drives from Seagate. We were still getting very good performance on this, but excuse me. As we grew, we kind of we looked at, okay, the next Nexenta is really starting to push SAS over SATA type devices, and the performance gains, well, not necessarily performance gains, but the performance capacity that we would get out of that made sense for us, so that we could grow more over a longer period of time. And then we're using different types, different tiered storage. We have a set of RAID Z1, and then we have a set of mirror drives as well for multi-tier storage levels. The benefits we got from moving to this type of system, unlimited snapshot capability. With EqualLogix and NetApps, you're limited on the number of snapshots. You needed to be able to do some archival. Not archival in the traditional sense, but we need to be able to hold on to some snapshots for well beyond the 14 to 30 day and sometimes 60-day period. And with unlimited snapshots, we can do that. We're able to integrate some of our file shares with CIFS on the Nexenta itself, as well as we can use NFS and iSCSI depending on what the situation calls for. We're also able to, of course, utilize the SSD in there, again, to keep the spindle cost down. And then the big plus was, excuse me. And the other thing that was huge for us was being able to utilize Community Edition in conjunction with the commercial version of Nexenta together. That allowed us to use some older recycled hardware to quickly expand our storage when we needed it, and then migrate that over into commercial edition or keep some of it offloaded on the Community Edition for lower cost, kind of like a third tier storage. Some of the benefits from a business perspective that we saw was, again, it was a very scalable solution. That number, 10 times less than legacy SANs, I think is extremely low. We've actually seen about a 50% cost reduction on a per gig basis switching over to the Nexenta storage solution. And then the ability to add components like HA and site-to-site replication as we needed it. So for instance, we actually deployed both of our head nodes without HA. They were standalone, and then within several months we added the HA configuration piece. And so we were very, very happy with the fact that we could kind of grow with it and we weren't getting killed with costs every time we needed to make a change. Some of the best practices that I'll kind of relay to everyone that we found going through this process. We got very lucky in the beginning that we were partnered with Pogo Storage or Pogo Linux. They were able to supply us pre-tested, pre-certified, pre-configured hardware that worked right out of the box. So just like going to NetApp and saying, this is what my workloads are. NetApp or EqualLogix is going to give you a box tailored to that. Pogo Linux was able to do the exact same thing for us, but with the Nexenta solution. We were very happy, very confident of the hardware that we ended up using because everything had gone through some pretty rigorous testing and Q&A with Pogo already. So we were able to just literally throw out the rack and go straight into production with it with some minimal fine-tuning. Take advantage of Nexenta professional services in all your implementations. We made extensive use of both Pogo professional services as well as Nexenta professional services, which allowed us to get into production a lot quicker than we probably should have, to be honest, on some of this stuff. They were there to help us tweak it and fine-tune it based off of our workloads very, very quickly, instead of us sitting there going, well, why are we having this performance issue for 2 weeks while we struggle with figuring out what's going on? And then the biggest thing is test and document. This is where I'll put my hand up and go, you know, we should have done some more testing ahead of time, and that was with deduplication. We thought, great, deduplication. You know, it's there, they say it's supported, the hardware configuration we have, they say it's supported, let's turn it on, let's go with it. Well, about 2 weeks into it, we started getting floods of phone calls. What's going on? You know, just massive performance issues, disk latency on all of our data stores was going through the roof, 4,000 or 5,000 milliseconds. So that's where I kind of really put in there, test and document. Because just because it's there doesn't mean you should turn it on. I think Paul from Pogo got one of his techs on the phone, and they just kind of gave us a duh. You know, why are you doing that without testing it first, type of a thing. But I can't overstress that enough. Test and document it. In fact, even now with the release of 3.1 and how they, by default now, they enable compression, we're testing that ahead of time. So even though we have 3.1 to update it on most of our units, we're going through and making sure compression is turned off until we have a good opportunity to test it ahead of time. Some deployment considerations. Unless you're using high-speed spindles on the back end, always use your SSDs for the ZIL and the L2 ARC cache. Again, one of the reasons we looked at Nexenta was the ability to use lower speed spindle drives, lower cost spindle drives on the back end. And you have to augment that by putting in appropriate SSD drives for caching. And of course, kind of basic, but aggregate network ports for redundancy. And one of the best practices that they kind of reiterated in training earlier this week too is always separate your management traffic on the Nexenta to its own dedicated interface. And again, one of the things they kind of pound in you in training is RAM in your head nodes is essential. The more RAM, the better. It's cheap, you might as well, you know, stack it up with as much as your hardware will support, because you will get better performance in the long run out of it. That's kind of it. You know, like I said, really a short presentation on more of a real-world example from a Nexenta end-user perspective. If you guys have any questions at all, either on the company or how we did some things on our Nexenta deployment or some other things that we learned along the way, feel free to ask questions.
So you mentioned in the beginning that you were going to keep and reuse your NetApp and EqualLogic. How did you reuse those in this context? Are they standalone things, or how are they integrated?
So the plan, right now they're still standalone. They ended up in one of our secondary data centers where we don't have Nexenta units installed to yet, but the plan is that using the ComStar, the iSCSI connections in there, that we will virtualize that storage behind the Nexentas and then integrate them into the Nexenta environment.
So you'll get another head node that connects via iSCSI to pull it in.
Yeah.
I just had a couple of things. The first one was, regards to, you mentioned that you were moving from the X25Es for logs over to Zeus RAM devices, and I'm wondering, is that a cost consideration? Are you able to use a lot, far fewer Zeus RAM devices, or is that just mainly a performance consideration?
It was mainly performance consideration. So we actually made that decision just yesterday, actually, to make the change over to the Zeus RAM. And again, mainly for the performance reasons. We are seeing a little bit of latency on the SSD drives. We also want to move, in order to make some of the HA config stuff work properly, we want to move those SIL drives into the JBODs themselves.
Okay, so because they're like SAS.
Yeah.
And then that's like, so that you expect that you'll be able to get like a higher, just an IO rate on the same spindles behind it then, that kind of upgrade?
Yeah, much higher.
Then my other just quick question was, you mentioned using a community for the replication and snapshot servers separately. And is that just acting as a separate community head and disk node, as like you're using like AutoSync or something similar to move snapshots over that as a backup? Or?
Yes. And some of the technical details on it. I'm not the one that handles some of that stuff, but yet the community edition's their own standalone head nodes with their own spindles behind it that we're offloading stuff to.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much.